Author and intimacy expert Laura M. Brotherson, host of the Marital Intimacy Show, educates and inspires women to create a mutually fulfilling, intimate, and passionate marital relationship, emotionally, spiritually, and sexually.
Hey there! Welcome to the Marital Intimacy Show. This is Laura Brotherson. Thanks for tuning back in today. The topic of this show is Jumpstarting Your Marriage, Part 2, Q&A. So remember in the last episode, number 3, we were talking to Tom about his concerns and frustrations with his intimate relationship with his wife. He was wanting to figure out how to get his relationship back on track, given his feelings of disconnect with her. We can all use a little jump start in our marriages at times, so I hope you'll find some valuable insights for your own relationship. So, let's continue. In part 1 of this discussion, we talked to Tom about the need for couples to get clear on what each other's needs are in the relationship. We can do this by each creating a list of what makes you feel loved and sharing that with each other. This is akin to sharing the keys to each other's heart. So our next area is that of making sure your spouse knows what you're feeling. There's nothing worse than a woman having her first real wake-up call about her husband's needs for sexual closeness than having it be accompanied by divorce papers or the realization of infidelity. I'm not saying that that is your situation, but I do think it is necessary to find a new way to communicate more openly and honestly with your wife. I strongly encourage husbands in your situation to be sure it is crystal clear to your wife how you are feeling about your relationship. Of course, if you can be equally concerned about how she might be feeling about the relationship as well, that will be a major plus. I suspect you have tried bringing up the subject in the past without much success. I might suggest writing out your feelings on paper so that you can fully express yourself and have a chance to review what you want to say before actually saying it. This nonverbal form of communicating is often helpful to those who have a hard time expressing themselves or who find such discussions typically becoming arguments that are never really resolved. Sharing yourself in writing has the added benefit of reducing the reactivity of both of you in discussing such a delicate and potentially volatile subject. In a letter, your wife must hear you out fully before she can respond. I definitely recommend that such writings are written in a spirit of love and a desire to have a healthy and mutually fulfilling marriage, rather than a list of complaints or criticisms. This can be accomplished by taking full responsibility for your feelings by using only I statements in your letter. This might sound something like, I feel unhappy in our relationship and fear that you may not be aware of my needs. Or, I feel unloved since I know you do not enjoy being sexually intimate. Or, I don't know what to say or do to make things better, but I would like to find a way to meet both of our needs more fully. So, if step 1 here is to be sure you both, or at least you, know what makes your spouse feel loved, and that you are trying to do these things more regularly, then step 2 would be to make sure that you either have a heart-to-heart discussion about how you are feeling about things, or to write a full disclosure of your thoughts and desires. It's really important to be sure that you are both fully aware of the real situation and the importance of it before we can determine further steps to take to improve the marriage. If your open dialogue or letter to her is enough to open the gates to new and more fulfilling interactions for both of you, then that's great. But if you find that your wife is simply not ready or willing to tackle what can be a real difficult challenge for some women, to begin to develop or cultivate their sexuality, then you have other choices to make. I need to remind you, and anyone else, that while sex is understandably very important to you and may feel like an absolute need, it is actually more of a want. Think about the husband who learns that his sweet wife has a terminal illness and watches his sweetheart quickly deteriorate physically. He can find the ability to go without sex for an extended period of time, if not indefinitely, Of course he can. What about the husband that learns that his pregnant wife must be put on bed rest with no intercourse for the remaining months of the pregnancy? Do you think he can endure such circumstances with a loving and compassionate heart without even much thought of his own needs? Absolutely. Would it be easy? No, most likely not, but it can be done. So in the spirit of these possible circumstances, I like to remind husbands that it's not impossible for them to be very much at peace and to be loving and giving to their wives, even if they knew they could never have sex again. Now, I realize it's an extreme example, but the point is to help men get to a place mentally of being willingly loving to their wife, unconditionally, with no strings attached. A generally ineffective thing a man might do who wants to improve the intimate relationship is to put pressure on his wife to fix the problem, that to her may feel like it is all her fault. A man is most effective at improving the intimate relationship if he can go into it with no strings attached or with no emotional attachment to a specific outcome. Now, this requires a degree of faith and patience and trust that things will work out somehow as they put their trust in God to step in and help their situation. But again, a wife needs to be clear that there is a problem. She needs to realize that. And remember, people change best when there is no psychological pressure attached. I love this statement by William James. When I accept myself as I am, I change. When I accept others as they are, they change. Acceptance is key. Another key concept is that of developing empathy. If we can learn to think like our spouse thinks, then we are supremely more likely to be effective at making good progress in improving our relationship. Think about it. What is your spouse thinking about you? What is your spouse thinking about your marriage and your intimate relationship? Are there other things that are getting in the way, that are keeping you both from enjoying a better relationship? How might your spouse be feeling about herself and her abilities as a wife? If you can add these kinds of perspectives into your thinking, you will have a much fuller and more accurate understanding of where you and your spouse are and where you need to go from here. One of the best ways to develop true empathy and the ability to see through another's eyes is to engage them in conversation about important subjects using something called the couples dialogue, a communication skill which I teach in Chapter 10 of my book, And They Were Not Ashamed. It's an incredibly effective tool for discussing such delicate and potentially charged subjects as sex and/or other relationship issues. I definitely recommend learning and using this couples dialogue. I too often see people who cannot see anything from any other perspective than their own. Each person's perception of reality is merely an individual perception, but each perception is just as valid as the others. Being able to recognize and allow your spouse to see things differently than you do is a great step toward loving and accepting your spouse unconditionally. Now, if by chance you find that your wife is simply not ready to address whatever is getting in the way of your intimate relationship, you must be willing and able to let that go and turn that over to the Lord and to move forward anyway, striving to be a better husband and striving to love her more effectively. Your best efforts at improving your marriage will be those aimed at making your wife feel more and more loved, so that she wants nothing more than to be a better wife and to love you better too. You know, I often sense in the emails I get a desire to learn some magic thing from me that will make their spouse change. But the magic comes from a willingness to change ourselves instead. That's where the real magic is. The only one we can directly change is ourselves. But we can have an amazing effect on our spouse's desire and willingness to change by improving some of the ways we act and speak and think of them. If we are kind and loving and patient, instead of angry and bitter and snippy, then it's a lot easier for our spouse to respond favorably to us. The change comes from our change in behavior, which is where we have the most power or control anyway, instead of us waiting around for our spouse to magically change. It's true that a marriage should be something that both partners think about, discuss, and actively work towards making better. But the fact is that at the stage that most couples come to me, things have already been not real great for quite some time. This usually means that one or the other spouse is not terribly interested in trying to fix things anymore, or that they have lost hope, or that they don't know what else to do anymore, or that they feel like a failure and don't want to try. This is why sometimes there is only one spouse who has the wherewithal at the moment to change things. And the good news is that it only takes one of you to change things. It only takes one to get things moving in a better direction. It only takes one to begin to respond to the other more positively and more effectively, for the other to begin to have a good reason to follow their lead. I'm just always hopeful that at least one of the partners will seek out new insights and assistance before the other spouse gets beyond hope. I hope this helps you to see that you are not powerless or without hope. You simply may not yet have done the things or changed yourself in the ways that will bring about a more positive response in your wife. Think about what you might be feeling right now about you and your marriage. Is she feeling hopeless, angry, afraid of what is happening to your marriage? And what are you feeling and thinking? Your own fears, anxieties, frustrations, etc. are also being felt by her, though she may not be specifically conscious of that. This all feeds into a downward spiral in marriages. I also like to remind couples of an interesting concept, that anything we think or feel about our spouse, just assume that information is being communicated directly to your spouse as if you had said it out loud. I believe our spirits communicate so much more completely than we are ever really tuned into. Think about it. You know how your wife is feeling or what kind of day she has had the moment you walk in the door. You can just sense it. This is the same kind of thing I'm talking about with her being able to sense your feelings as well. If you can change your own thoughts, beliefs, and fears to be more positive and productive, it in essence gives your wife hope that things can and will get better, and also offers a vote of confidence in her as well. It's basically the concept of faith, believing that good things are on the way, and maintaining that positive belief even when you have evidence to the contrary. You are correct that it is not healthy to avoid difficult discussions about your unhappiness and your hopes for your relationship. I realize it can be hard or scary to bring up such things, especially if you're not confident in yourself as a communicator or just hate confrontation. This is why I suggest the letter or email approach for you. You can be much more thorough and thoughtful in communicating about these important yet sensitive subjects. I think it could be very healthy for your wife to hear much of what you have written to me. I know as a wife, I would definitely want to know if my husband was feeling the way you are. I would hate to hear about it after it was a lot harder to fix. It seems to me that it is much better to potentially upset her with your letter or discussion now, when the problems you have are quite fixable, rather than later, when more frustration and resentment has built up. There is a real danger for both husband and wife when marital dissatisfaction goes on for very long. We become more vulnerable to outside influences and temptations. Some women don't like to hear that when their husbands are struggling with feelings of sexual loneliness, but it is something that wives have a responsibility to be attentive to, just as husbands have a responsibility to be attentive to their wives' needs, so that they do not disconnect and become vulnerable as well. I think you could include in your discussion or letter to her that you would like to think of some things you could both do together to spend a little more time together. If you can start with things that aren't specifically sexual in nature, you'll probably be more successful, since remember your wife is generally wired for emotional connection before sexual connection. Fairly simple suggestions for you to begin in your marriage are to be sure you're having a date night regularly. You need to find ways to create more positive and fun experiences and memories together. Just have fun together. Maybe you even need to arrange for the babysitter and/or plan something that she would enjoy if she is already feeling overwhelmed, for instance, with childcare and household responsibilities. I'd also recommend getting this great little book, 365 Questions for Couples, by Michael J. Beck. Whether it's on your date night or when you're alone in the car or after the kids are in bed, you can ask if she'd like to ask you some of the fun questions in the book to begin to open your conversations to things other than the routine stuff. If she's hesitant to share, then just let her ask you the questions and keep the pressure off of her. This book can be a lot of fun for any couple if you just keep it low-key and be okay if she doesn't seem interested the first time you ask. Well, there you have it. This has been episode number 4, Jumpstarting Your Marriage, Part 2 of the Marital Intimacy Show with Laura M. Brotherson. I hope Tom got some helpful ideas here, as well as each of you listening in. So we've talked about Step 1, learning the keys to your spouse's heart and striving to love them more meaningfully every day. Step 2, we've discussed being sure you and your wife are both fully aware of what the other is thinking and feeling about the relationship. Number 3, we've talked about developing greater empathy and the ability to see through your spouse's eyes by using the couples dialogue communication tool. Number 4, I've suggested that you get serious about date night in whatever way you can arrange that. I also suggested using the book 365 Questions for Couples to jumpstart your conversations to be more personal and emotionally connective. So here's your homework. Choose one of the things we've talked about today and add it into your marriage and see how it can change the dynamics and open the door to greater closeness in your marriage. Number 2, share with us your thoughts about this podcast and any additional insights you might have gained about this matter. You can post them here on our blog so that others can benefit, or you can email them directly to me at Laura, Laura, at strengtheningmarriage.com. I appreciate your comments and questions. And lastly, if this podcast has been helpful to you, I encourage you to share it with others so that we can all work together to strengthen marriages. Well, thanks for tuning in today. I hope you will find great benefit from the things we've discussed today. I especially hope these things will allow you to enjoy your spouse and your marriage more fully. You can also learn more at our website, www.strengtheningmarriage.com. In our next Marital Intimacy Show, we'll take on the topic of affair-proofing your marriage. Hold on to your hats. We hope you'll be back for more insights and inspiration for strengthening your marriage intimately. Until then, this is Laura Brotherson with the Marital Intimacy Show. Have a great day.